Okay, so I think the generalization, why strip away all our commission, is not accurate. So we look at the industry in terms of conflicts of interest, and commissions will shift from commissions to fees on investments, and that levels the playing field between investments outside the life industry versus investments inside the life industry, where they're wrapped up inside commission. So it's only really investments that will shift away to a fees basis. In terms of life and product business, that will shift to a different commission split, and short-term insurance retains commissions as and when and as they are. So it's different approaches for different industries based on the conflicts of interest in those industries. I think the fear is mostly from the advisor side, is that the shifts in commissions or the shifts to fees will result in lower incomes for them, because they think there's a concern that customers won't pay fees. I think that's the issue. They won't understand fees. That's why we are also adopting a consumer education campaign so that consumers understand the difference between commissions and fees, and the fact that they're already paying for advice. They just don't realize it because it's hidden away in a commission, which is part of a product. So to strip out advice as something that is worth paying for, in terms of like any other professional service, I think highlights the value of the advisor and the value of advice, and stops forcing them to hide under a bushel and pretend they're doing it for free. Yeah? So RDR hasn't really forced any change within the FSB. It's the Financial Sector Regulation Act that shifts us from being a sort of sectoral-based regulator based on sectors, both prudential and market conduct, to a totally dedicated market conduct regulator. And that takes effect sometime next year. And it's that shift or that change that is forcing a lot of change inside the FSB, from the way that we're structured, the way that we draft regulation, who we employ, how we think, how we approach stuff. That's a very significant change for the Financial Services Board. I think, to be fair, our RDR approach is a lot wider than was done in Australia and in the UK. So we don't just look at the investment sector, we're looking at the life sector as well as the short-term sector to try and address conflicts of interest across the board. We have, I believe, been more consultative. So one of the downsides of that is things that might take longer to introduce because of the need or the will to consult with the industry, that we don't have unintended consequences. One of the downsides in the UK apparently was it created a big advice gap in the UK. I don't necessarily believe that was a consequence of RDR, but I believe because when they did their RDR, they introduced for the first time qualifications and minimum fit and proper standards for advisors. We've been doing it in South Africa for 10 years. So there's a lot of differences in terms of how the countries have approached it. I think the big lesson is that we're not the first to do it, so we can learn from others' mistakes. So we want to publish a note on equivalence of reward. We want to do that by the end of this year. We will be publishing the FAI's General Code of Conduct and the FAI's Fit and Proper Standards for force and effect next year. We'll also be having the Policyholder Protection Rules coming out this year, which will contain some RDR changes, as well as the insurance regulations. They're all going through the regulatory process and the parliamentary process where they need to, so none of them will come into effect this year, but there will still be a lot of information coming out from the FSB. No, not necessarily. So phase 1 is finished. Phase 2 and phase 3, we said that phase 3 would happen when the Conduct of Financial Institutions Act is passed, but we sort of combined phase 2 and phase 3, and we'll do everything based on whatever legal instrument we have at our disposal, but it will culminate with the introduction of COFI.